Hello, welcome to the latest episode of Data Unchained. I'm your host, Molly Presley. For those of you new to the show, this podcast has really evolved over the last couple of years as where we founded it originally talking about decentralized data and the challenges that brings to organizations. We were thinking a lot more about data that was scattered maybe across data centers and hybrid cloud, how you might put that to work in enterprise IT environments or HPC workloads. But now that conversation has really evolved as AI has hit pretty much every company out there in one way or another. So thinking about whether you're a model builder, where you're training foundation models, training large language models, or if you're in the enterprise and you're looking at how are you going to run inference as a backbone in your enterprise, Data Unchained tackles the problems of decentralized data. How do you identify it? How do you move it? Some of the technologies that are associated with that, and ultimately some of the really cool business outcomes you can accomplish by tackling these challenges. So without further ado, let me introduce you to my two guests today. Mike Seashols is the CEO and chair of Secuvy. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Molly. It's exciting to be here.
So you are a new guest to the show and from the Hammerspace side, a bit of a new partner. Tell us first about yourself, your background, and then give the audience a little bit of insight into what Secuvy does.
Okay, I'd love to. If you don't mind, I'd like to start because I'm a Hoosier. And Hoosiers have a lot to claim as a celebrity status with IU winning the football, and Purdue at least is in the Final Eight and they're NCAA at this point. But I grew up in Indiana. I'm a Hoosier from the roots. I went to school in Indiana. I got to tell you, just from a personality point of view, I saw my future wife, when I was 17 years old. I was with my dad. She was walking across this room at the first day of college. And so I did one of these to my dad and I said, "Do you see her?" And he says, yeah, that's the girl I'm going to marry. So I went over to her, in the women's dorm that night, called her up from the lobby and said, "I'd like to meet you. I saw you on the campus today." She came down. We spent 3 hours together and I asked her to marry me and she said yes.
You're kidding me.
Not only am I an entrepreneur, I'm a one-call close sort of entrepreneur. So, and we've been very, very fortunate to have been married now decades, and we have 2 boys and 2 granddaughters. But my career I started with IBM while I was in college. They taught me how to program, and I loved programming. And when I graduated from college at Indiana, both my wife and I, we'd lost our parents. So we said, where do we want to live? Because the attraction of staying in Indiana was not from a family point of view. So we said, let's go to California. And we moved to Silicon Valley, and I stayed with IBM for a decade. And then I met Steve Jobs, and I met Bob Noyce, both founder of Apple and founder of Intel, and had lunch with them. And came home and I said to my wife, I met 2 soulmates, and I want to be an entrepreneur. And I quit IBM after 13 years and started my entrepreneur career. And my kind of first assignment was the head of sales and marketing at Oracle Corporation, working for Larry Ellison for 5 years, and fortunate enough to hire some just outstanding people, Mark Benioff and Tom Siebel and Craig Conway and all these just wonderful people, able to grow that. We doubled every quarter, just to give you a feel. Every quarter. A lot of these companies, we're going to double every year. We doubled every quarter. But I fell in love with data. Data was, to me, the backbone of computing. And having been a programmer, I appreciated the process and the logic, but I really appreciated the value of the data, because that's really where all the decisions were made. So I became just a kind of a fanatic with data. So I then joined another database company called Inference after we went public at Oracle. We took that public. Then I got in love with unstructured data. And as you maturate your view of data, you realize the real value is not in the rows and the columns and the numbers. It's really in this unstructured data. So I started an object database company. Fortunate enough to take that one public. And then I did data replication, which really says when data is changed, how do you synchronize it around the world? And companies like United Airlines, the name of the company was Golden Gate. And when you're selling hotel rooms or airline seats or keeping track of ATM transactions, if you have kind of a millisecond to update all the data sources around the world. And so I fell in love with how do you synchronize this data as it's moving around. So being a data nut, I got attracted to Secuvy because it was partially my fault that data got sporadic and moved all over. And when we started the data business, we didn't think about security and privacy and, the protection side of data. So I got attracted to say, okay, I'm going to kind of finish the job. I'm going to go in and help Secuvy figure out, how to understand the data, find it, classify it, tag it, and then protect it. And that was the business model we had for the first few years. And then about a year ago, we got approached by Hammerspace, by Sam, and we met Floyd, and we're going, you know what? As we're managing the storage of data, understanding or the files and understanding the data will add a lot of value. Because now we can make sure that appropriately the data is where it should be, how it's being amplified to get to the GPU or to the memory. So I think we both said, wow, when we can leverage each other, this really is a marriage made in heaven. And as we have seen the maturation of AI, we're going, you know what we bring to the party in just a capsule, we're able to filter the data before you feed it into your AI pipeline, into your AI models, because so much of the risk is baking inappropriate data into those models. Then you screw the model up. So we, with partnership with Hammerspace, are able to identify what should go in. I sort of say, give us the criteria. Some of the criteria we're going to help you define: governance, compliance, security of sensitive, IP, governmental. Those things can't be moved into an AI environment. To me, now I feel like I've done a full circle, because now data is not only protected in that AI model, but it is amplified in its value. So we're back to this original concept of how to use data to run your businesses better. We're now back to AI. Let's utilize the data, but let's make sure it's appropriate. And that's the role that we play. We're going to make sure that it's appropriate in that AI model. So a little bit of background, and that's how we got here.
Okay, and so Secuvy, what market category is it? Is it an established category? Is it something new that's coming about in the AI space?
I think we are turning the market upside down. I mean, I have the perspective from when I started, selling computing. You had DP managers. That was what it was called, data processing managers. And they typically would, report to a CFO, and once in a while they would report to a COO or a CEO. And then that evolved into an IT. Then in the security and privacy and governance space, you became a CISO. And that CISO, CISO, was in charge of that data security. But then when they started using more of that data for other things like AI, they're going, who's the buyer? Who's the decision maker? And I think what organizations are doing now is I think they're kind of turning almost everything upside down. And does that AI buyer, because right now I believe my buyer is the AI buyer. Whoever is figuring out how to accentuate and transform their company with an unbelievable ROI, if it's done correctly, who's my buyer? And I think a lot of them are lending into the CIO role. I think we're seeing an emergence of an AI. So a CXO is a CAI officer. And where they get, organizationally structured, I think is in movement right now. And it's the same with Hammerspace, where you would be selling to a storage person. We're now selling to an AI storage person, which is different. So we both are sitting there migrating together to say, who do we want to sell to? And it ultimately gets down to ROI. But I think we have a storyline now that as the markets are shifting on who to sell to, I was talking to Jeff, who was managing your Asia group, and I said, my preference is I'm going to start with the CEO, because the CEO has been absolutely driven crazy by the board to say, what are you doing about AI? And they're looking at, how am I going to get a return on investment? How are we going to make sure that I'm risk averse in developing this? What's the process I got to do? Because I got to coordinate it all over the company. So you start with a CEO, whether he flows into the CIO, or he flows into, the CFO or the CISO, don't know. But I think our story is so compelling. I start at the CEO level, even at a $10 billion company.
Awesome. So, Floyd, let me introduce you to the show. I know you have been on, but it's been quite some time. Floyd Christofferson is Hammerspace's VP of Product Marketing. Floyd, before we jump into kind of the meat of the show, give us a little bit of background. I think I have probably two of the most interesting people in tech on the phone right now, with kind of interesting different backgrounds. Tell us a little bit about yourself and about Hammerspace.
Sure. I won't give you the full bio. It's too long. But I think that especially relevant to this conversation, Mike talked a lot about the data and so forth. My epiphany came to this with the metadata, and this goes back into the 90s, where I was running a post-production facility in New York. We did massive amounts of 3D animation. We with SGI hardware, silicon graphics hardware, audio, and so forth. And one of the biggest problems that I saw there was, that data was scattered all over the place. We had audio files, we had video, we had 3D animation, we had rendering, and all these types of things. And then we also had to collaborate with people in other places. And that began a journey that ultimately ended up me joining SGI, and for 10 years running their product marketing for, file systems, storage. But, the thing that always caught back to me is, if you think about the way the internet happened, right? Data used to be always in these places, and suddenly with HTML, you had an abstraction layer that you could look across different locations, different silos, and so forth. And that abstraction layer was metadata. And it was like, well, wait a second. Why doesn't this work for data as well? And so that began a journey starting in the 90s and then through SGI and ultimately to Hammerspace, where if you can, just like with HTML, where you've got a code that actually abstracts all of the underlying stuff in websites and contents and so forth. If you can leverage the metadata at the top layer, suddenly now you've got the decoder ring that can really unlock how data is used. And silos don't mean anything anymore. Well, Mike touched on this a moment ago. AI is the perfect inflection point for that. Mm-hmm. Why? Because, traditional IT is built hierarchically. Going back to the early 90s, where companies like IBM and SGI had huge HSM systems, Sun as well. And what did they do? Hot data came in and it filtered down to it was cold. It was hierarchical, hot to cold. And then as it got farther down into the archive, it was either forgotten or never touched again. AI doesn't work like that. AI, you need access to all data all the time. So how do you do that if you're actually having to go to the source? What if you could use that abstraction layer to do that? And so it's a long journey, but it's the same journey that ultimately gets us to this point where by leveraging the metadata, and using that as the key to unlock where the data is, you can actually satisfy not only the typical silo problems that enterprises have been dealing with for years, but now it can simplify how you can even activate AI in the enterprise.
Awesome. And I know you skipped past some of the more interesting bits. And I've known you for a long time. So and I get that. So let's jump into talking about GTC a little bit. So I assume GT is probably the most important technology event happening in the world each year right now. saw you both at the show talking to a lot of customers. What kind of problems were bubbling up that people were coming and talking to you about that are really top of mind right now?
Go ahead.
So
I spent all my time watching Floyd pitch because this guy knows how to tell a story, and so I was your wingman. So go ahead.
I think the biggest thing that I saw was this confusion about how do I get started on an AI journey. Mm-hmm. You have to separate this into two categories. There's the giant hyperscalers, right? They are spending billions, tens or hundreds of billions on building out infrastructure and so forth. But then you've got the Fortune 1000. They all know that AI is something they have to do. It's inevitable. This train is rolling and it's not going to stop. The biggest problem is how to do it. Because the minute that you start looking at how do you activate your data for AI, suddenly legal gets involved or compliance and governance gets involved. And so, and I had people from end user customers coming up to our booth. We had, even people with agentic AI and inference applications coming up and talking about the biggest pain they see is, well, we have to go buy new storage and we have to now copy all our data over to this. And that became, again, back to the metadata, that became the real, sort of differentiation here is they were stuck on how to get started. And so, we could talk about this more over the conversation, but it was unlocking that easy button to launch an AI project without all of the friction and the unnecessary cost and the complexity and legal ramifications and migration and time. That was the biggest thing that we saw. And of course, sort of spoiling the lead, Hammerspace AIDP is the key way to do that.
I would amplify that, and thank you. That was very, very well said. And to augment, I'd say, I believe we are the only solution, the we statement here, that is non-intrusive, doesn't require remanufacturing or redeployment or re-architecture of your computing environment, changes in, how you're processing your current data models or anything else. But because we're both software oriented and because we're joined at the hip, kind of at the source code. This is not a kind of bi-directional marriage. This is an integration marriage of the two technologies where wherever your compute topology is, and you got your GPUs and you got all your storage mechanisms, you got your flash and you got all that other stuff, it's perfectly fine the way it is. What we do is we augment it, we amplify it. We don't have to move the data, but let's just make sure we get access to the appropriate data. So we go in at the first step is we go in and we scan and classify and tag and link all the data. So now we have a bill of material of their data. You then set up the criteria of what you want, whether it's governance or compliance or security or IP or government, whatever it is, to make sure that as that data is flowed into that AI pipeline, you're getting only the stuff that's appropriate. Now, the beauty of this is you go in now to a Hammerspace, storage system where you have orchestration that's going across all of your different hardware environments. Doesn't matter what, we're agnostic. Because we know the data and that Hammerspace has the capability of managing all those silos as a single view, kind of this, global namespace and all that cool stuff, you're able now to say, I can implement AI with the right data, with the right data storage model, as easy and as quick as any other option available at kind of like pennies on the dollar compared to anything else. So you mitigate the risk of time, you mitigate the risk of cost, you mitigate the risk of reinventing, a whole topology. It all goes away.
Mike, what you've done is really highlighted, I think, a key point. Maybe we back this up a level, is that, a lot of the conversation around AI and, frankly, IT and silos in general, it always is an infrastructure conversation, right? whenever you see, AI solutions, it's usually attached to buy a shiny new piece of infrastructure.
Right.
But I think that maybe the thing that you're highlighting here is that adoption of AI, particularly in the enterprise, is not a storage problem. Mm-mm. It's not an infrastructure problem. It's a data problem. Mm-hmm. It's a data governance problem. Mm-hmm. And I think that is really, if we up level it to that, that's really the starting point that this whole conversation really pivots around, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Then I'll go one step farther in that, in that once you solve the data problem and you're now into the computing problem, and that's the storage, the GPU and the memory, our game hasn't stopped there. I mean, because now we're not only amplifying with the right appropriate, data, but because we know what the data is and we know where it should be moved and we know what is idle, we can move it closer to a GPU. We can move it into the memory box. We can move it into a different storage philosophy, flash, etc. So the ongoing value is not just set up in architecture. It's the continuity of the execution side. And whether that's the new data that's coming in that's filtered or the optimization of the computing environment. I mean, got them covered. And the customer's got to say, wow, you've solved some of my most significant, challenges. What data and how to compute it.
So I, at GTC, heard a few customers use explicatives that I won't use on my podcast, but that holy smokes moment when they understood kind of the implications of that. And I want to make sure that that's coming through really clearly here. Yeah. That we were at an event where NVIDIA was talking to some of our team recently. And what they really highlighted was it's one thing to put together a curated POC. You curate a data set, you're in a controlled environment, everything perhaps is isolated. And that's how you model an AI project, maybe as training an agent, whatever it is that you're doing. But when you envision unleashing this across your enterprise, the opportunity is massive because you have all these data sets, like Floyd talked about, some that have been archived, some that are on user machines that scientists created, then organization maybe doesn't even know about. The data is constantly changing. Lots of value there, but that's where that curated, controlled environment and data set doesn't work anymore. You have to have a way to understand which data is new, understand which data when put with other data all of a sudden has a security breach. So maybe we could start on your side, Mike. How does Secuvy help with this when you're operationalizing across the enterprise, making sure you know the context of the data? And then Floyd, if you could talk a little bit more about how's that augmented into the metadata, which you were talking about at the beginning.
Yeah. So think of us this way. I mean, to be perfectly fair, the bigger the data set, the more, value we have. And petabytes of data doesn't scare us because we've got the ability to scan and classify using AI. So we are very fast. And because we're architected to be able to be less intrusive into the IT organization and the computing organization, we can kind of run in the fringes. We can, be scheduled very effectively. But the key is, we scan and classify and link every piece of data in the enterprise. And then we monitor it. We monitor change. And when we see change, we amplify that. We got it. We see duplication because a lot of times people are copying the same stuff or trying to use the same stuff, and they're just different versions, and you got to clean all that stuff up. So think of us as almost a system of record of all the data that's available in the enterprise, and we understand it. It doesn't matter where it is, how it's structured, nothing. Because using AI, you have the power of, we do pattern matching, but we don't have to predefine patterns. Most of these technologies out there now have to define the pattern before they even start looking. So they do comparison. We don't do that. We just say, just open it. That's all we need. And we find after 4 or 5% scanning, we have figured out the model of where everything is. So that AI just gets smarter and smarter and smarter and smarter. So think of us that way. So after a while, all we're scanning is change. And then all we're having to screen through the attributes of the criteria is the change data. So once you've got that first heavy lift done, now you're just doing relatively minor efforts, but we're always monitoring it. So that gives the customer confidence that, okay, I've got good, appropriate, clean data, in my model.
All right. And then Floyd, how does Hammerspace activate all those insights?
Sure. So, maybe just for context, just so it's clear. So what we're really talking about here... Is
that a play on words? Adding context. Giving context. It's like a play on words, adding context, giving context.
There you go. So yes, it is, and it's intentional, pun intended, because what we do is, and you were talking about this earlier, if you copy a curated data set into a new store, then everything is pristine. You're not going to be copying the CEO's salary in information or W-2 into there, but it's curated. The reality is, in an active environment, you don't know what data is there. So what makes this simple, and kind of the bleep moment that we saw at GTC, is rather than having to copy all data into and do this big massive migration into a net new storage repository where you've had to go through legal review and compliance review, and now that data is a forked copy. It's completely a separate copy. It's not active anymore. What Hammerspace does with our AIDP platform, we point it at an existing file share. Right? That means we assimilate that metadata even on active live data that is still being used in the enterprise. They've got day-to-day operations. It might be customer service data. It might be data coming out of, analysis on a manufacturing line of fault tolerances or any number of other things it could be. This is stuff that has to be activated real time. And so now without interrupting access to that data or disrupting existing day-to-day operations, we now have a picture into that live data via its metadata. Secuvy then comes in addition to this, and is able to extract rich metadata from the contents of that file. So not only the file system metadata, where it is and what it is and how old it is, but is there PII information in there? Is there confidential information that needs to be? And so this is where it all comes together so beautifully. Hammerspace is an orchestration system. We can route that data up to GPUs in the cloud, into anywhere, and I'll talk a little bit more about how we do it with AIDP for vectorizing it for AI. But without knowing which data we can move, and without even that rich metadata, it takes an additional step. So Secuvy will help us tag that confidential data, that PII data, and that becomes metadata tags that Hammerspace then incorporates into its orchestration system. In this way, when we now have a curated subset of live data, and this is happening real time, as new data is coming in, it's on live active data. As we now have this curated subset, we can be piping that into the vector database and exposing it through our MCP server endpoint. So now your agentic AI, your inference engines, they can be pointing at real-time data through the whole thing. Right? And then that now becomes not just a curated standalone POC, but it becomes a day-to-day operation that now can be automated as an ongoing project for an enterprise AI.
So this sounds pretty cool. It sounds very cool. I think about most enterprises are trying to put these kinds of processes, systems, and whatnot in place with not huge staff. Maybe they have an AI expert or two, maybe more. How complicated is this? Is it easier to go buy a new storage system and add on some, packages as you need them from different types of software environments? Or is this type of integrated solution easier to deploy?
There's no question. If you go out and try to build your own, and there are consulting companies all over the world that's all they do is help enterprises do this. But what are they doing? They are having to, first of all, sell a pile of new storage. So, and there's analyst stats out there that show that 80% of the cost of an AI project is in duplicating infrastructure that you already have. Buying new storage, buying new this or that. And then you have the time of migrating the data. Then you have the complexity and legal risk of which data have you copied. And now it's just adding complexity. So it's time. It's time and it's the ROI. And remember, a lot of enterprises know they have to do AI, but are not entirely sure what the ROI is really going to be. There's a FOMO aspect of this if we don't do it, we're going to be behind. But then there's a FOMO, a fear of messing up, that if we screw it up, we're in big trouble. And so it's kind of like, we don't have a choice. We got to spend the money. And that's the aha moment we saw at GTC, when you can tell both the agentic players that are looking for an easy way to get into their agentic and inference applications into an enterprise, and the enterprises themselves who are looking for an easy way to actually implement this. It's like that, you mean I don't have to spend all this money up front before I even know the ROI? You mean I can just point this at a share and begin to prototype what my AI project looks like, and then scale it once I've proven that ROI, and even extend it to cloud without interrupting my existing day-to-day operations? It's a no-brainer.
I think the thing is, we enjoy almost every aspect of the buy scenario. Time to market. Customers are always talking to me about time to value, time to market. And because we don't have the hardware topology issue of figuring out where to go buy it, where to get it, how much it's going to cost, and then integrating it, that's all gone. What data to use. They're trying to figure out, where is the data? I got unstructured everywhere. What kind of exposure am I got? What's my risk mitigation? Stuff like all that. So that all goes away. Then the really cool thing is the value proposition starts pretty much in day 5 or 10. I mean, it's days. Most of these are months, weeks, years. And we're able to do a proof of concept or a proof of value in days or max weeks, because all you're doing is laying it in to your existing environment, and you do a couple of dials here and there to get the tags right, to get the topology right on the computing, on where you're going to do your orchestration. The question is, how much do you want the system to do, or how much do you want, the call to action? A lot of customers will say, how much are you going to tell me to do, and how much are you willing to let me do, or would you do it? And we said, look, if we agree on the criteria of what filter out, I'll do it all. But if it's sensitive data, I'll filter it out. You don't have to worry about it. So that's a lot of the sort of the nomenclature is, how much do you want us to automatically do, and how much do you want to manually interface and and then look at it's a little bit like, self-driving cars. When are you really going to let go of the wheel? Because the power is there to be able to build this quickly and safely and get rid of the risk issues. So
a new term seems to be evolving in our space. I haven't talked to you guys about this, but you probably have seen it as well. But the idea that businesses used to run as kind of business unit silos. You had your finance data, you had some research data, you can think about, we all know what that looks like. And now with AI, those silos have broken down because you want to run your business on AI.
Right.
And that AI will be the quote unquote operating system of the business. This seems like a really interesting foundation to make that possible. Have you guys come across that term? Is that kind of how you envision this being deployed?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think Jensen pitched that hard, right?
That's probably where it came from, because everyone's talking about it.
I mean, and having been in this industry for a long time, and I've seen it evolve, but I've never seen it turn upside down. The internet was the closest thing when we went from mainframes and mini computers and client server and all that, and then the internet kind of allowed some central, workflows going out to the cloud. But this is a total upside down, and it's fast. It's going fast.
But it's an inevitable evolution. I mean, one of the advantages of working at SGI back in the day was, we were, and this is when exabytes nobody could imagine exabytes, but we were dealing in an HPC environment where we were already managing hundreds of petabytes and into the exabytes going back into the early 2000s. And you saw it as inevitable that in order to bridge these silos, every storage is going to fill up and you're going to bridge it. And the only way that you can really get fully activated that data is if you do have that operating system mentality. I mean, if you think about back into computer history, DOS, what was DOS? It was on the computer, your single computer, the file system was embedded in that computer, right?
Yeah.
And then now it's spread out into the network.
It was a closed system. Yeah.
Yeah, well, exactly. But if you just had one big computer and that was your business, it was all good. That was your operating system. When it spread out into a network, that worked great if you had one storage. Again, it became the operating environment. But how quickly did those stores fill up? And now you're fragmented again, and it's no different than it was when you were putting the metadata and the data on a disk and handing it to somebody as your way. Well, AI is a forcing function that is actually causing people to have to make the change that they've been struggling with really for the last 25 or more years. And that is, how do we fundamentally unify the data that is now fragmented across departments, fragmented across silos, locations, clouds? It's a hybrid world, and we're just living in it. And this is now an opportunity for all of this stuff to come together based on that unified metadata layer.
Yeah. Well, as Jensen said, it was a retrieval model. You had central computing and retrieving data. You maybe had some distributed data, multiple guys distribute, but now it's flipped. It's now the data's at the top. These AI applications are going to, but the models are up here. It's all going to be around the maturation and the amplification of how to use that data to do everything in your organization better, because it's real-time data.
It's emphasizing the fact that this is a data problem, not an infrastructure problem.
That's right.
The typical knee-jerk, if you've got a data problem, who do you call? Well, you call a storage guy. Well, the reality is no. You call the data guy. And who's the data guy? The one who can actually help you actually transform your data into that operating system.
So I want to talk about that transforming data a bit more, and how some of the old processes and old ways of doing things just don't work. So I think about the media space where you're creating videos, and there used to be rooms full of college kids assigning metadata to the movie. Right. I know Floyd's seen that, Mike. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but they would just watch films and tag, here's a place where fire happened, here's a place where car accident happened, here's a place where Brad Pitt showed up, whatever it is. So they could enrich and have information about those video files. So we think forward, and that's true in every industry. And some industries just haven't had the discipline to do this. The life sciences space is classic, that every scientist knows about their experiment and their research, and the organization is constantly begging them to add metadata, add tags. What is this that you've done, so we can add value? Now you look forward to this AI space where there's so much data, billions of files and objects that you're dealing with that need to be self-described in order to keep them secure, get value out of them, that type of thing. So when you think about this model flipping, the old way of manually assigning metadata in order to do stuff with your data doesn't scale. It's impossible. There's not enough humans to do that. Tell us what this looks like in an enterprise environment when you're all of a sudden going in and saying, okay, I have this logical view to all of my data. And you guys are saying, and we'll know the context of that data and do the right things with it. Just, can you speak to that one more time? Like, how do you do that?
Let me give you a story. We got contacted by one of the government agencies that said, look, we really need your help on protecting this data, securing this data, private. So we go in and we implement Secuvy. And then all of a sudden the CFO says, Now, wait a second. Do you have an inventory and metadata and tags on all the data that we have in the organization? I said, yes, we do. He said, well, could you do a data intelligence query? I'd like to know. And he started asking me business questions, not security questions, not compliance questions, business questions. They were really, truly AI questions. And I said, you're really asking me something to say, if I open this AI to you as a data source, you really you could be answering your question with Claude. And he goes, really? I said, yeah, point it at us. And because we've got all your data and we've parsed out all the stuff that you asked us to parse out. And all of a sudden the CFO is sitting there running some sales reports. And he calls me up and he says, Mike, this is unbelievable. I've never been able to get access to the insights that my business had because, this goes back to the business intelligence world, way back when, because they kept blocking data. But now with AI, it's the ultimate business intelligence, tool set, as long as you aim it at the appropriate data. And I think that's really what's happening now, where this whole AI is getting momentum from people that have been starved to be able to operate their business better.
That's exactly where this project where we're working together with Secuvy works well. Is because you remember in the beginning when I talked about you point the Hammerspace AIDP at a share, and already we are instantly assimilating that file system metadata. You're adding rich metadata on top of that. Well, guess what? Part of the AIDP solution is a simple plain language query interface. So the data scientist doesn't have to call IT guys and say, please move the data over here, and then I can start to figure out what it is. They can sit at a console and within minutes, without having to migrate data, without having to install new things, they can start querying. They can start asking questions. What is in there? What should we use? What can't we use? And all of that becomes tags and actions. Hammerspace has a concept called objectives. These are plain language business rules that apply rules to how data should be placed, managed, protected, shared, collaborated upon. If you're going across sovereign boundaries, what can and can't move. And you can do that now with the combination of the two platforms, being able to sit there and ask questions of your data. I don't know how it gets easier than that.
I'm going to amplify, because the first time I saw that, I'm going, you got to be kidding. Because I'm a techie. I'm sitting there in that natural language interface. The cool thing is our policy engines are just right next to each other. They collaborate with each other. And our views are a little bit different, but we synchronize all that. So when you're taking the input from this natural language query, we're both kind of amplifying it to say, okay, boom. It blows you away. And being in this for decades, you're going, wow.
But Mike, it's also cool in that you've seen in the past lots of data management solutions that kind of do their data management over here. And it's like, well, how do you bridge it into action? How do you actually take action with it? And that's really the beauty here, is because this metadata then drives data behavior. That's the declarative aspect of our orchestration engine, so that it's routing, but it's standards based on the front. It's a standard MCP endpoint or an NFS share or an S3, bucket, and it's actionable now. And the data goes in motion without having to call the data guy, the IT guy, to, use another point solution to migrate data. So
I like putting icing on your cake. The cool thing is you don't have to do all the prep work of what my AI model is going to be. All this work's independent of all that. Because a lot of times when we develop technology solutions, we got to say, well, what's the requirements? What's this? What's that? So you're doing all this pre-planning before you jump into the pool. This one, you just jump into the pool. And you don't have to worry about what you're going to try to figure out. You figure it out at the end. You don't figure it out at the beginning because you don't know. You just don't know.
without creating waves for everybody else in the world, because it's non-disruptive. That's the key.
Exactly right. Yeah.
So as we wrap up, I want to kind of think about this from the bottoms up for everyone. So you think about an enterprise and some of the obstacles you've talked about. You want to get AI ready. What you're saying is you can use the infrastructure you already put in place, the networks, the compute, the storage, leave the data where it sits. So no long migration, which any IT person knows migration is like makes people twitchy, and it's a bad word in the IT space because it takes long and is complicated. So you leave the data in place, you use the infrastructure in place, add this data platform and context layer to it. And then when it's time to do AI, you simply hook up your applications to this environment. Is that the right way to think about it? And your data is, I kind of air quote it, AI ready.
Totally.
Yeah.
Live data, active data in your enterprise is AI ready without disrupting day-to-day operations of other aspects of the organization that are also using that data.
Yeah.
Is there anything else like this out there? I mean, I think we're all in the space, and we've seen the approach of using legacy approaches of buy yet another set of infrastructure to go do your AI on. This is saying, no, use what you have, make it AI ready. And I don't think anyone else is doing that.
When we, because the cool thing about GTC is we would in there talking to our very biggest partners, our services partners, the multi-billion-dollar guys that have global power, and you show them and you explain to them what we do. And every one of them came back and said, nobody's doing this. This is really a unique opportunity for the market and for us together to go to market together. So I think, and they have the best perspective because they resell every technology in the world, because they're fulfilling a need maybe from a specific customer that wants something specific. But when they're looking at a blank sheet of paper, they're going, there is nothing that does what you guys do. And that was a great validation. And then when you talk to these very large organizations, I was talking to one in Korea, late last night, and it was like, you can do that? That was their question. You can do that? I mean, that's a cool question to have. And I said, yes, that's what we do. It says, we didn't think anybody could do that. That was their quote. They're a $15 billion, a division. We didn't think anybody could do that. No, that's what we can do. We can show you next week. So, I mean, the reaction's been really cool.
So as folks are thinking about this, if you want to see what it looks like, we'll link into the show notes a 3-minute, maybe it's 4 minutes demo that shows this. And you can almost have that moment that the Koreans that you were just talking about, Mike, had of, really, you can do this? And it really is that easy.
I know.
And so we have a cool demo, which we'll link in the show notes if anyone wants to take a look and see, like, really the code running, the natural language queries, all that good stuff.
Right.
But it's a great way that, as we've built the AI and now inference is the next focus as enterprises are going to make money, find new science results with inference. This is the foundation that it needs to be running on. And we want to make sure we're sharing that as broadly and widely as possible. So I really appreciate you guys taking the time personally in your very busy schedules to come and talk to us about this.
Thank you. It's been great.
I never get tired of being a wingman for Floyd. Never. Or for
Me
you,
neither.
Molly. I'm
or
ready.
wing woman, whatever you call it.
I'm ready.
All right. Thank you guys so much for joining the show.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Data Unchained, powered by Hammerspace. To learn more, visit hammerspace.com. If you have a guest you would like to hear on the show, email me at molly@hammerspace.com.